How's it going, you guys, and welcome to your morning cup. Now, Europe is seeing a drastic rise in COVID cases. The continent that had things under control when the first onset of the pandemic began is quickly, descending into turmoil. Spain and the UK, on the other hand, that were worst affected in this year, have been, turning things around. The UK especially, which had COVID cases running left, right and centre with more people in the hospital than ever before, is, slowly and steadily recovering from the pandemic in terms of its people understanding the severity of the issue. We've seen more social distancing guidelines in place across the continent, but even more guidelines in the UK and Spain, especially in the UK, dictating that more fatalities occurred in the UK over the span of the past 3 months than ever before. What we also understand is the fact that the European Union as a whole is very blatantly divided when it comes to the pandemic. People are asking about closing borders to each other in terms of being a united front is no longer available to them. Borders that can be shut down in the EU are being considered to be shut down, but only to no avail, considering the fact that a unilateral effort across the spectrum is needed, and initiatives and help by numerous nations to each other, those nations that are dealing with the pandemic rather well, and those nations that aren't, is very much evident when it comes to understanding how severe this issue actually is. In the past few months, there's been a massive change in numbers when it comes to the EU countries. Only 9 out of the 45 countries in the EU have reported cases in March that are lesser than the ones that they faced in February, citing the fact that even more cases are going to be running abundant as we speak. COVID-19 by no means is over, and by no speck of the imagination should we as a species believe that we can just wander out without face coverings, wander out without the right precautions and the right social distancing guidelines, and expect the pandemic to just be over and done with. We also understand that in drastic news that parts of Estonia have run out of hospital beds, whereas parts of Czech Republic and Slovakia are dealing with more COVID-19 fatalities and no COVID-19 patients having to be admitted in the hospitals than ever before. Czech Republic and Slovakia are starting to send people along with Latvian hospitals to other neighboring regions in Europe because their hospitals are just completely overrun by the sheer scale of the people that require immediate healthcare. The worst hit nation in the European Union still being Czech Republic, and by any speck of the imagination, the people of the Czech Republic are dealing with things and adversity the likes of which you and I can't really comprehend, considering the fact that this is a region that has been very promising in terms of its recent growth. And with the hit of the pandemic and the onset of this pandemic, we understand that everything took a turn for the worse, especially considering the fact that the people of Estonia and the people of the Czech Republic, they were budding towards a new promising future. When we talk about the rest of the European Union, let's talk strictly about the European Union in terms of nations that are dealing with it the worst, all the way to the nations that have actually gotten a control over it. Now, this by no means is speculation about the governing bodies of these nations, considering the fact that this pandemic has been running rampant in the United States, which is, the biggest superpower in the world. So by no means is this a shot at those nations that are not dealing with it well, but is surely dictating the data and the facts that we have to our disposal for now. What we understand is the fact that Slovakia and Poland are nearing the same amount of COVID-19 fatalities as well as positive tests, whereas we look at Estonia and Bulgaria with nearly the same amount of people in the hospitals, but drastically different case positives and vaccinated people. What we also understand is the fact that Sweden and Hungary have similar fatality numbers but drastically different number of people in hospitals as well as vaccinated people, thereby creating this weird discrepancy in which we see that there are nations that are doing better things, there are nations that are doing rather substantially well when it comes to dealing with the pandemic, but by no means is any nation in the European Union out of the thick of it. However, we understand the fact that there are a few other nations that are dealing with the things rather better than their counterparts. Nations like the Netherlands and France are dealing with the situation a lot more better. Latvia and Croatia are taking the right measures and proceeding towards the right situational guidelines as well as social distancing guidelines, and making sure that their worst affected regions within their own nations are doing what is needed to make sure that they curb this pandemic in any way, shape or form. When we look at the data of things, we understand that Netherlands and France have similar vaccinated people, but drastically different number of people that are in hospitals. What we understand by this is that on one end of the occasion where things might seem a little more better, on the other end it's completely worse. Moving on, we understand that Latvia and Croatia have similar vaccinated people, but a huge difference in the number of people in hospitals. There again, the same equations come into play. Two sides of the equation, two sides of the coin, but yet drastically different numbers and drastically different measures in place. What we also understand is the fact that Lithuania and Italy have barely anything in common, highlighting the biggest discrepancy on this list, dictating the fact that one side where we look at Italy dealing with things a certain way, and then on the other side when we look at Lithuania dealing with things in a completely different way, it just highlights the fact that it's all about what the people of these nations understand the severity of this issue relies upon. What we understand here is the fact that if a civilization, a group, a society doesn't understand that this needs to be dealt with in all seriousness, we are always going to be put in a predicament wherein the bigger picture is always going to be blurry. That the rest of the population is always going to be under threat, considering the fact that we can't take it seriously. What we also understand is the fact that there are regions that are handling the pandemic rather well. Nations like the UK, which were one on the complete end of the spectrum dealing with the pandemic, are now recuperating. Nations like Spain on the complete end of the spectrum are now recuperating and coming back and trying to gain momentum in terms of which they can actually do something for their nation. That the people of the nation are finally understanding that this situation is not going to go away by sheerly neglecting it. That the right guidelines need to be in place, as well as the right initiatives by you and I, the regular people, need to be in place. What we also understand is the fact that Austria and Ireland with different vaccination numbers, but Austria ensuring that most of its citizens are vaccinated in comparison to Ireland. Now Ireland has undergone severe lockdowns as we speak, and this is shown in the sheer data that they've put out recently, that the cases are drastically dropped, whereas Ireland was one of the worst hit nations, is now completely recuperated and is on the right trajectory of things to completely curb the pandemic. Portugal and Finland are drastically different in terms of their numbers, but both nations are nearing the same stats of people vaccinated. Cyprus and Norway, on the other hand, look absolutely different, as a new surge in cases in Cyprus dictates the fact that the social distancing and guidelines in terms of societies understanding the severity of the issue has completely gone out of the people's minds. People are starting to get complacent with the fact that COVID-19, yeah, it exists, we just have to live with it. But that's by no means the case. If you don't take things seriously, and if you just get complacent about the fact that my facial covering is going to be underneath my nose, I'm just going to hang it on my ear, all of that is not going to work. Cyprus has seen a new surge in cases that is testament to the fact that this sheer rise in cases might just drop Cyprus right back down the spectrum, make it one of the worst hit nations again. The UK and Denmark have different numbers, and while Denmark is having more vaccinations rolled out, while the UK is still dealing with the massive onset of people that are still admitted in hospitals because of the pandemic. What we also understand is the fact that Denmark has gone above and beyond in terms of making sure that when the right lockdowns needed to be in place, they were in place, as well as the right restrictions were in place, making sure that people understood, people were well educated, and the information was rolled out in massive onsets, dictating the fact that the regular person on an everyday basis should also understand the significance of this lockdown, should also understand the significance of this issue, and understand that there is a bigger and broader picture here that you and I have to understand without any arguments, without any room for any speculations, that a lockdown is necessary, so it needs to be there. And that is testament to the fact that the data that has been put out by Denmark today is great. What we also understand is the fact that there is one nation that has dealt with this pandemic possibly the best in the entire European Union, and that is Iceland. Well, some people could speculate the fact that it has a smaller scale population when compared to the rest of the EU. But we also understand the fact that the people of Iceland have always honed a community mindset, have always held a thought that togetherness and this thought of a communal harmony process in place has always benefited them in every way, shape or form. This pandemic is just testament to the fact that when the people of Iceland needed to stick together and understand that there was a broader picture in place here, and then every single individual in Iceland needed to do the needful, they did just that. And that just dictates the fact that the numbers we see from Iceland are nothing but remarkable. They're dealing with it the best in the European Union. Of course, the highly contagious disease is going to be very well put at bay, considering the fact that the sheer extreme temperatures in Iceland always make people stay a little bit away from each other, considering that they have to stay indoors most of the time. But even people that don't stay indoors, people that have to do day-to-day work, people that engage in continuous interactions with one another, are also doing the right guidelines, are also taking the right precautions, and thereby, what we see is testament to the fact that the facts don't lie, the numbers don't lie. With this, we understand that the European Union is in more trouble than we otherwise anticipated. We spoke about Brazil last night, and we understood that how Brazil is also in constant turmoil, with new numbers dictating the fact that Brazil has already crossed the 2,000 people dying a single day with COVID-19. And the European Union following suit. In no way, shape or form do we understand that this pandemic is just going to be curbed by the whim of it. Every single nation on the world needs to do its own bidding. And those nations that are dealing with it rather well need to help other nations deal with it so that this pandemic can be curbed. Nations like India and Pakistan that have so many differences and that are always against each other, we can see them joining forces. India is about to send a huge amount of COVID-19 vaccines to Pakistan. This is completely highlighting the fact that hate does not always persevere. That if two nations with so many differences like India and Pakistan, that the rest of the world always pointed at and stating that this is where World War III would begin, are able to come to the table and unilaterally agree that people's health and the humanitarian efforts that are required to deal with this pandemic are much more important than our differences, and that we understand the fact that these differences by no means are ascertaining towards the fact that humanity as a whole should suffer. It goes to show that if two nations like that can come together in the time of need, why can't the rest of the world come together in time of need? There are other few nations that need the COVAX program and the WHO to step in and intervene, and by all means it should. By this we understand that the COVID-19 pandemic is still very much prevalent, and I hope you and I do not get complacent. I am doing everything I can in my terms in spreading the message, and I hope that you are doing so too. Please do not get complacent. The pandemic is still very much prevalent. Do the right things, take the right measures, make sure you're safe. This has been your Morning Cup, and I'll see you tomorrow.